Welcome back to Insight Club, and today we're talking about why you should stop regulating your nervous system. Stay tuned.
The first rule of Insight Club is you don't talk about Insight Club. You do Insight Club. The second rule of Insight Club is the only assumptions we make about one another are that we all want happiness and we all want to avoid suffering. The third rule of Insight Club is you check all your other assumptions at the door. We hope these conversations will bring you insights that incite you to action. Welcome to Insight Club.
Let me just start with I said you should, and there's no shoulds, right? But I need to say should because it's one more way to why you're telling me that I can or cannot do something. Do you have this when someone tells you I can or cannot do, then that's what you want to do?
Oh, yeah. I'm the
Everyone,
most stubborn person I know.
Yeah.
That's a surefire way to
Yeah,
get me to.
Yeah. So we were talking before getting in here about this idea of stop regulating your nervous system, and that started with something that you shared with me, actually.
Yeah. It was content shared by a coach who helps people with their nervous systems, and her point was regulation is a form of control top down or a form of control outside in that can be one more weight on the system. And as soon as she used that phrase, regulating your nervous system is whatever it was, maybe it was stop regulating your nervous system or something about like that being a negative at an intuitive level. I was like, oh, I hear what you're saying, because regulation is this box. And then what I was fascinated to see was the response to this post. And somebody said, no one knows what you're talking about. And I was like, oh, well, that activates me and I'm going to get in there. And I got all snarky and was like, well, I know exactly what she's talking about. And the whole experience was interesting because it was clearly people with activated nervous systems. Like, here we are meeting in this space that's talking about nervous system activation and what should we do? Should we regulate? Should we not? And we're like living out the concept in our interactions. And that whether you whether you resonate with this idea of I do want to regulate or I don't want to regulate, what this brings up for me is what we really mean with regulate. And in the same way, it's hard to avoid using the word should. Like, you should stop regulating. Looking at our language can just be a helpful way of figuring out how we're going about a process. So as somebody who's incredibly highly sensitive, I do need to tend to my nervous system a lot. I need to tend to my nervous system a lot. Something as simple as I have a really hair trigger startle response. So if my husband is coming, this happens a lot while I'm cooking because I'm like tuned in to whatever's on the stove and it's making noises. And my husband will come up behind me and put a hand on my shoulder and I'll jump. My heart rate will be elevated. I'll be in a panic response for sometimes up to 20 or 30 minutes. That's my system. Okay. So in order to go on with the rest of life and not feel all jangled, I do need to tend to my system. But this idea of regulating really, jumped out at me because as you were talking about in our conversation before we started recording, there's this energy in the word regulate that is, come on, get it under control.
Get it together.
And that's what I responded to in this, this piece of content around stop regulating. So that's we're playing with it. We're being cheeky saying,
Yeah.
"Stop regulating your nervous system." But that's the energy it's coming from, is asking, "Huh, what are we imposing on ourselves when we say, I have to regulate, I have to be regular, I have to get things back in the box?" Yes, I do want to have tools available so that I can return to homeostasis in my system. And maybe there's something about the language of regulate that's not helping us.
Yeah. And even the how we're regulating, right? I I love the topic because I thought of basically that's yes, that's the control, but there's also the feeling like we should always be at normal when
Yeah.
life is not always normal. Like the things that are thrown at us are not always normal. We shouldn't be always in the same like peace and love and everything is okay, because there is a moment for changing the way we act and reflect things depending on the situation. And of course, what we're doing is just trying to navigate the things the way we can with what we have, right?
Yeah.
And I feel like, unfortunately, a lot of the people that needed a little bit more of the work on their nervous system might be the ones that are not aware enough for that, and the people that feel like I need to regulate my nervous system and feel shame for not being regulated are the ones that are sometimes being overly responsible for other people's reactions.
Yeah, there's not a balance.
Yeah. And we were talking just before we got here that our activities to regulate our nervous system often involve not being regulated at all, and it's not about that old saying like just hold yourself, or like don't cry, or whatever it is. This is not regulated, this is pushing down, right? And the activities that often help with regulating the nervous system can look nothing like normal, like you said. So I even would like to talk about that, because it's not that like we won't be thrown out of our regulated state ever, but I feel like one of the things that got me into this was, are we shaming ourselves with this whole thing of regulating the nervous system and feeling like I need to heal more, I need to do more work, like you said as well, instead of seeing this as a tool that we get to have for when we need it.
Yeah. And what's occurring to me as you're speaking is that eventually I do want to be in a state of homeostasis.
Yeah.
Maybe regulation is a synonym for homeostasis. And by the way, maybe regulated and dysregulated are technical terms that have a very specific meaning, and I'm just not aware of them because I'm not an expert in the nervous system. So that's entirely possible, right? That like these terms were chosen with intention
Yeah.
because of what's happening in the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous systems. And so I want to be open to that and not make assumptions about how these work, how we
I,
got to these
I'm
words.
aware. I'm making assumptions with this as well. Like even the words, we tend to think like, maybe that word is not the word that I want to say. It makes sense to use regulate. We are connecting it to control. It's better than saying like controlling your nervous system for sure.
Yeah. And if I think of it as related to regular, right?
Yeah.
It's back to so I got
What's the usual?
I'll take the startle response example. Like I got off of my normal rhythm and then I'm coming back to that rhythm. But the term homeostasis feels very good to me and very,
Yeah.
very nurturing. Um and I've lost my Oh, okay. So what it was occurring to me is that coming back to regulation, to homeostasis, that's the final thing. That's at the end. And the question we want to ask, I think, is what happens in between? And it might look real dysregulated. I I had I had a crazy heightened experience a couple of weeks ago where I felt unsafe for my life. Like I ended up, I don't even know how, but I ended up like in an altercation and this guy was yelling at me and he had a weapon. He had a weapon he was using for sport, but I was like, this man is really, really mad at me. He's yelling at me and he's got a freaking weapon. I'm like, how did I get here? And it was so incredibly activating. I came home, I did somatic work, I stomped, I yelled, I did all of these things that look real dysregulated. You know, if somebody were watching me, they'd be like, that lady's out of control. Um, in order to, is like it was this intuitive knowing of what my body and my energetic system needed in order to complete. So
Yeah.
I got to this mode of heightened activation. It wasn't appropriate, safe, smart to like to complete this. Like completing it with the guy would have looked like we got into some kind of fight and I would have lost, right?
Yeah.
So, complete,
Not a good idea.
right? But if I don't complete, then I know from years of doing this that stays stuck in my body, it stays stuck in my muscles, it stays stuck in my psyche. So I was doing really un what's the word I'm looking for? I was doing a lot of stuff that looked out there. And I was doing it in the safe space of my office, which is also my meditation room and my yoga space. You know, is like right next to my altar, like protected. I burned Palo Santo first. And letting myself go to that extreme. I yelled, I created these energetic boundaries. I just did all of this big, ugly stuff. I cried, I angry danced. That's what moved it through. And I was amazed at how quickly afterwards I came back into feeling regulated and feeling in homeostasis and being able to be like more discerning about how things were affecting me, because one of the really big activators here was I felt like my force field was violated, you know, it's that feeling of like, oh, somebody's energy has come into my space and I don't want it. And, you know, it's like a cell not being able to keep out a toxic material. You're like, oh, I don't want it. So I got to get it out. And then I feel like I need to rebuild that, you know, that cellular membrane.
Yeah.
So in order to come back to a place of calm, of homeostasis, I needed to get deeper into the uncomfortable feelings and the inappropriate, I'll say, but in quotes, expression of big emotion. And I say inappropriate because if these were things I had done in the presence of other people, they likely would have been very uncomfortable and felt like what I was doing was not okay and was wrong.
Yeah. And that's where I love that, because I have the same thing. For me, I need to complete, I need to do all the somatic work of clearing that from my system, rebuilding my field and so on, whenever it's needed, to feel safe and to not carry that with me and not be like overthinking and like ruminating on whatever happened, which often is what happens when we don't complete. We end up stuck in our mind instead of letting the body do the work, which is what cats or dogs do when they shake and they like do all the things that they do. Anyway, we but that's the point as well, that I feel like sometimes we forget that it's not work for us to do when we have a normal response to a not normal situation, right? Because it wouldn't be normal for you, maybe someone with a more, in quotes, regulated nervous system could be like unfazed,
I know,
by
I
the
was like, "What would Eckhart Tolle do? What would Guru Jagat
yeah,
do in this situation?"
yeah. But we can't deal with how someone else would deal with a situation where someone is mad at you or someone has a gun and you don't know if they would use it or not because you don't know the person enough to know if they have control over their own rage or not.
Yeah.
um we can only know about ourselves. So this is where having assumptions on how I should react or how I should be regulated doesn't help in any way, because we can only know what we know in the situation, when we know with the knowledge that we know in that present moment. What we can do is deal with that in the best way that serves us, and it will be different for each person. So it's not that you need to regulate your nervous system so it never happens again, or the next time it happens you are more like in control of the situation. You handle it
I
in the
got out
way.
of there. That was
Yeah,
the best thing that could have happened.
yeah,
That was the
yeah.
best possible outcome. Like, I got out of there with no damage to myself or to my vehicle. Yeah.
And there might be times where we are getting too much out of our regular homeostasis, like you were saying. That might be the case to question if we are in the right environment.
Yeah. Yeah, it made me actually incredibly grateful for the people I spend time around. I was like, "Oh, yeah, everybody's talking about how the world is going crazy and people are just like, going after each other," and I was like, "Oh, I'm so grateful that this is a real outlier kind of experience for me, that I spend so much time with people who take responsibility for their own energy and have an intention of sharing energy in a way that's supportive, nutritive, and compassionate for the people around them. Like, I spend a lot of time with people who care about the impact their energy is having. I was like,
Yeah.
oh, that's really beautiful. And that's not what everybody gets.
Yeah.
Like, there was a little kid present who I assume was this guy's son, but he was a like 7 or 8-year-old kid who was receiving all of this. Like, whoa, imagine if that were your normal.
And imagine if that kid is growing up with that kind of reaction.
Yeah. Yeah.
How
Um,
would they regulate their nervous system?
yeah. And I will say, I feel like one of the things I feel is very frustrated that it's on me to do that work.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I'm walking around with a hair trigger again, and that's not anybody else's responsibility. It kind of sucks. It kind of sucks to go through the world and then like that was the whole rest of my day. That was my morning hike, and that was, that I was doing to try to bring myself out of my mental funk and to, like feel good about the world again. And then my whole day turned into, trying to come back to any kind of sense of normal functionality from this like, extreme stimulus. And again, that's not anybody else's responsibility to be quiet and walk on eggshells because there might be a Megan with a highly sensitive nervous system, but it feels really unfair. I'm like, damn, I had to use so much of my energy just to come back to like some semblance of normal.
Yeah.
And there's that, like, again, you were talking about the mismatch,
Pendulum.
the
Mm.
the unequal weight, for people who do take responsibility to go like, okay, what energy am I putting out there and doing work? It makes me really curious too, what our culture is missing that maybe it used to have, or maybe what my culture is missing that other cultures do have, um, that would help me to come back to homeostasis, or maybe like build a faster neural pathway back to homeostasis when I got thrown off. And I'm thinking of things like expressions of emotion or movement being normalized. Um, Stillness and like holding still is what's normalized in American culture. Uh, including we put a lot of kids on really intense pharmaceutical drugs because they will not sit still in a classroom. Right? So, like,
Yeah.
letting your body move, we know is so important when you're activated. And I'm like, well, if I were moving my body more often on a regular basis, would that mean I didn't have to do these big, I mean, I guess sometimes there will be like big things that happen, right? Like the bunny rabbit gets chased by a predator. That's a big deal. And then you're going to take a minute and you got to shake out and you got to tend to that. But could it be that maybe I could bounce back and rebound from more minor activations more quickly or with less work if I lived in a culture where people were moving, shaking, yelling, even just being able to express their opinions and make sounds and use their voices. Like that's not a thing. Be quiet and sit still. That's what that's what we really prize in American culture.
Yeah, I think I touched on all the main points. It's moving the energy, right? Either if it is shaking, dancing, singing, yelling. Um, those are the things that would be even like done in community
Yeah.
in moments like this. And one thing that I I feel like we I just touched on community in here as well, and the things that you're bringing. There were a lot of things that in tribal cultures they did they used to get together and do these things together, transmute things together, have a regular we're using the word again, a regular ritual of dancing together or sharing stories together, or all of these things were done together, so it was normalized uh, to do these things, and not just I need to be hidden in my space to be doing this. Of course, it's there are things that are great to be done alone, but we wouldn't feel like it's weird for me to do these things. No, everyone would know that these things would help them. So I feel like we're returning to this a little bit still, but um, the fact that sometimes we need something to, I don't want to say regulate, but like to work, not work either, to like to bring ourselves back to our normal. Uh, and we have to postpone it. Sometimes makes it harder to deal instead of if we could work on that. Uh, and I'm using the word work again. But anyway, if you could deal with that in the moment instead of trying to push down to then work on it in a
Mhm.
different moment. If it was more like a regular thing, a fluid thing, and that's one of the reasons why I feel like when we have our habits, when we have our rituals that are consistent, it's easier to deal with things. Like I even noticed, for example, that not just yoga, but the cold showers help me a lot of not overreacting on situations, because I do have that. s- My body's learned to deal with a spike of adrenaline, so it's easier to not overreact. But this is like it's not even regulation in that case, like we're increasing our resilience for,
Yes.
yeah.
It's building up immunity almost.
Yeah.
Um, I've been taking cold water rinses after my showers for years. My mom always recommended it for boosting immunity.
Yeah.
'Cause then your pores are closed up when you get out of the hot shower. Um, But I had a speaking coach who recommended it to practice peak experience, like you're saying, and to specifically practice breathing through it. And this is, a lot of what's in the Wim Hof method, and people who are doing cold plunging. It has other things it does for the body, but it is also a really powerful way to practice peak experience, get that activation and agitation, and say, I'm going to breathe through this. I'm going to meet this experience head on and allow it and move through it with aplomb and grace.
Yeah.
And that's brilliant. It's practice. Years ago, I went a whitewater river rafting, and it was a friend of Grady's who took us, and he had formerly been a river guide, so he used to take groups out. And these weren't really big rapids, but they were really big to me. This is the first time I'd been on a river, and I'm not really an adventure sport kind of person. And we just started out, and we were in this calm place. And he says to me, all right, Megan, at a certain point, I'm just going to tell you jump. And your job is to jump in the river and then get back in the boat. I said, okay. So we're going along, we're chatting, just having a great time. And all of a sudden he goes, Megan, jump. And I didn't even think about it. I jumped, and then I scrambled and I got back in the boat. Well, later, there were only 4 of us in the raft, so we were riding really light. Later, we hit a, rapid, we hit a bump. Everybody goes flying out. I was the first person back in the boat because I had the chance to practice and get it into my body. And I am so grateful. And of course, he knew to do that because he's a guide and he knows what's going to happen in that kind of situation. But when I got to the high stress, high adrenaline situation of, holy cow, everybody is in the river and what's going to happen, I didn't think, I didn't, have to play with monkey mind thoughts. I acted because I had it in my body. And I would love to have, more practice like that. It was a really empowering moment for me as well, because I have a story that I'm not good in a crisis. And that comes from the fact that my stress response is generally to freeze. And so in a crisis, and you need people to act, it's like, oh my gosh, this guy fell and he's bleeding. And you're like, you call 911 and you get a towel. Like, you need action. And I was always worried I would be the person who's just standing there staring, completely unhelpful. And I got to have a taste of, I can take action in a moment of crisis and stress. And it was because I'd had the practice, and I only practiced once.
Yeah.
So I want that program.
Yeah, I was thinking that's
regulating the nervous system. Where's the get your nervous system toned program?
Yes, I feel like you just touched on the big thing, because that's the thing, right? When we even if you think of workout, there you won't carry a big weight with ease if you're not getting your getting your body strong enough to do that. It's just a moment of effort, of crisis. You might end up hurting yourself, even messing with your back and so on. But if you're working your body, that might even be some light weight to carry. I feel like that's the thing, because yeah, it's okay. We are humans. We are going to be activated at times. We're going to mess up. We're going to react in ways that we are not in our best. And we're going to meet with people who are not in their best as well. And even worse, when it happens that the two people are not at their best. And then all the mess happens. But if we are constantly needing to regulate, that means we are we're burning ourselves, and we need to heal that burn. We're burning ourselves and we need to heal that burn, instead of, like you said, toning and getting ready for any kind of situation, that no matter what happens, we're still good and we haven't burned ourselves. We might be a little bit more sensitive in that moment, and maybe we will need to like shake a little bit and so on, but we don't get so messed up and shaming ourselves because we weren't ready for the situation that we faced.
Yes. So I love the weightlifting analogy, and it's making me think that what we're often like thinking of when it comes to regulating our nervous system would be the equivalent of, I did lift the weight that's too heavy and now I'm laid out on the couch and I have to just ice my back for several days. And then of course it instead of making us stronger the next time, it's like now we're sore and we don't, like, it's harder to practice. There's a tenderness there. Um, I will say, in this experience I had where I got like so wing jangled, it was 10 times, 100 times better than other times I've been activated. Like I could actually feel the power of the practices that I have, because in that moment, not only did I not freeze, but this spaciousness was created, and I felt this timelessness, and I was able to know rationally, like, I need to not have any more interaction. I need to leave. And I also I sent out this prayer, this intention to this little, because there's this little kid here. And so I had this moment of stillness, this moment of infinite space to go, I'm here, I'm safe, I'm about to leave. This is not a good scene. Okay, little one, here's my prayer for you. That was a very different experience than, gosh, if I think back to when I was 16, I did this class that was intended to empower women, and learn how to like fend off an attacker. It didn't go well. I just like, I wasn't able to do any of it. You know, some of it was physical, but some of it was just like putting your hands up and saying, stop, you know, move away. I couldn't do it. I couldn't speak it. I was just stop, you know, I was like not in a place of power at all. It was hugely triggering. It had the opposite effect of what it was supposed to have. I didn't finish. I mean, I don't even remember what happened, because it was like, it was so disastrous that it was just one of those things where I think the instructors and my mom had taken the class and she'd enrolled me. You know, my sister had done it. They thought I would like it. Everybody just kind of went like, let's never talk about this again. You know, let's pretend this never happened, because it was so disastrous. So if I think, and that was a safe place because it was all people doing role play, you know, so there wasn't
Yeah.
actual danger. But if I think of that nervous system of 16-year-old Megan, and then I think of the nervous system of 44-year-old Megan, I'm like, oh, I had a real life example. This was
Yeah.
not somebody in a padded suit. And I handled it in a way that, you know, feels like I've advanced so much more.
Yeah.
I can feel the difference. And I'd like to do some more intentional, focused weightlifting on that
Yeah.
front.
Yeah, I feel like that's the thing. Like both the weightlifting analogy and the cold showers, the 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 thing on the boat that you shared as well. Like this explains a lot of what we need, because it's great to have the nervous system regulation practices for when we face some. It's just like going back to the analogy, just like having our stretch after a workout, just like going on a massage when we are more sore or like with our muscles tightened and so on. But what we get us ready for not suffering as much is the weightlifting, or like in this case facing the small conflicts and the small stresses and so on, instead of always like trying to avoid them until something big happens, and then we have no way to run. So
Yeah.
this practice, like the guy shared with you, like Megan jump, or like the weightlifting, the cold showers, anything that gets us to a peak, and we practice being on that uh, stress, but in a controlled way where we can build a resilience, uh, is actually what we need, so that we don't need as much regulation, because we are more flexible in that way.
Yeah. I joined a challenge recently. I didn't do any of it, but I was really intrigued by the idea. I joined a challenge that was around making ridiculous asks, and one of the resources that she shared. Let's see if her name is on it. Her name's not on it, so I can't share her with you guys. But one of the resources is embracing 100 rejections.
Mm.
And is this the place for you to write up, like, these are the 100 ways in which I made asks with the expectation of being rejected, and that's what it's about, right?
You know who are the people who do the best in this rejection exercise? Telemarketing people. They get to be rejected 1,000 times a day, and by people that they don't really care, so it's okay.
Oh God, I don't know if I want that training ground.
Me neither. But yeah, that's a great training.
Yeah, being just showing up and being willing to be disliked, being willing to be rejected. And of course, the woman's last name is Chadwick. But part of her point is, if you ask 100 times, it's likely that at least once somebody will say yes.
Yeah.
And I like that as a challenge, because I'm also in charge of what feels scary to me. Like, one of my asks would probably be, how is that a hard thing? I was on a podcast and I really enjoyed the conversation we had, and I wanted to be able to share more of the audio in reels. And I thought, well, she'll say no because, you want people to listen to it on the podcast platform. So in my mind, I'd built up this story as to why this was like a clear no, but I asked and she said yes. So it's like somebody else would say, that's not a scary thing. Well, to me it is. So I like how it's self-led. I'm in charge of what's the level of risk I'm taking. And the reality is, just like with weights, 15 pounds to me would be a big deal. I'm out of practice with lifting weights, and somebody else would be like, 15 pounds? What are you? Or whatever it is. I mean, I guess depending on how you're how you're lifting, if it's repetitive or it's once or something. But we get to be in charge of the amount of stretch, the amount of difficulty and risk. There was something around. So I wanted to kind of come back to this idea of, how are we feeling now about the advice to stop regulating our nervous systems? And it sounds more like it's morphed into, hey, regulating your nervous system is going to be so much easier and faster and less work if you are also strengthening your nervous system. And that's where we really want to be. And then that also rebalances things, because we were talking about, if somebody is not aware, doesn't know how, or isn't willing to be aware of the impact their energy is having, they're coming into a space and they're kind of vomiting up all of the nastiness that they're experiencing. Yeah. Then we're absorbing less of that. Like the stronger we're building our systems to be. And I really do have as a life goal what Guru Jagat talks about, that somebody comes up to you and says something and you don't agree with it at all, and your response is kind of like, oh, all right.
Yeah. You have the right to have that opinion.
Yeah. And what if I could have that response, not just hearing an opinion I disagreed with, but somebody, being actively angry at me, or
Yeah.
actively rejecting me. So it's no longer just about the idea. Like, what if it really is about me? And they're like, "Nope, you're wrong. You're stupid. You're terrible. We're not, we're not accepting you." What if I could show up and be like, "Okay."
I'm now that you said this, I feel like I'm happy that I noticed in the moment a while ago that I made some progress on that. I there's and by no means I'm like elevated to the level that I would like to in dealing with conflict, but like there are a lot of things that still get me activated and angry and frustrated with stuff. But there was a moment a while ago where someone that I care about told me that I was self-sabotaging, and with some anger in their voice, because it wasn't like just like trying to help me see things through. It was like I pointed a self-sabotage and they pointed it back to me to a moment where I was self-sabotaging. And because I knew, like, yeah, that I just said, yeah, you're right, I am. I can see that I'm doing this.
Gold star.
Gold star.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Ooh, that's a way of breathing through it. Because
Acknowledge
well,
acknowledging.
the accepting
Yeah.
it and breathing through it. I don't know if you've ever had this experience, but I have found that if I accept pain, it passes much more quickly. We have a washing machine that's top loading and it's very deep.
Yeah.
So often when I pull stuff out of the washing machine, I whack my elbow. Hurts like a mofo.
Oh.
And if I stay rigid and I'm in the pain and it hurts so much longer than if I breathe, I rub my elbow, I'm like, "Oh, I'm so sorry. Oh my goodness, that one was a bad one." And
Yeah.
it's like evaporates.
I totally agree with you. You're gonna ask about the inside, and I just got that as you're saying this. Well, first of all, I agree. I have the same thing with pain. If I can, physical pain, like if I can just breathe through it, uh, it can even become a little bit pleasurable in a sense,
Mm.
because it like you let that pass. And I feel like that's the same thing with these conflict situations and stuff, like you mentioned. If we accept what we're doing here is like we're removing the resistance, and if we're removing the resistance, there's there's a point where it's not anymore like there's not that traction of pushing against. We're just letting it pass, and that's the thing that martial arts teach as well. Like you don't fight the punch, you move with the punch, right?
Yeah.
You don't fight the you let the movement keep going instead of trying to repress and stop. And this is what we're talking about, the difference between pushing something down, like, which is resistance, and letting that move. So if we can, instead of build more resistant, and then have to deal with a lot of things like shaking and screaming and so on, and instead really accepting what's true in that moment and moving with that, whatever it is, and instead of like creating the resistance, maybe that's something that can help build more resilience as well.
I think so, because that's the whole thing of the Wim Hof breathing in cold water and
Yeah.
breathe if you're doing a cold water rinse in the shower, breathing into it. So people, you can drown if you jump into water that's too cold because you'll panic and your whole body just freezes up and your breathing becomes really shallow and it's a real bad scene. You can be in cold water for like really cold water for a while and be safe and okay if you're allowing your system to readjust. And maybe that's the power of the word regulate,
Hmm.
because we don't have the option of saying to the external world, you just stay completely still so that my nervous system won't get stimulated and activated. We don't have that option. So, what if regulation is a process of readjusting, accept, respond, becoming, and I mean, that to me sounds like the definition of
Yeah.
resilience. And then zooming in further and reminding ourselves that what it looks like to readjust and regulate might not look like something calm. It might look like, because something else you could do in cold water is like, oh my God, it's cold, right? That's another form of accepting it and moving it through you is that uh, giggly exclamation.
Yeah.
Or what we were talking about with the yelling and the shaking and the moving. Let's expand our vision of what readjusting and regulating looks like to include a lot of movement, a lot of sound,
Moving through, not
yeah.
just the aftermath of things.
Yeah. I mean, what's happening to those muscles as you're lifting the weight? They're actually breaking. There's
Yeah.
a lot of contraction. There's not a on the outside, I have control and I have good form. And on the inside, there's a lot of activity and movement. So we have to just readjust, I think, what we think it looks like from the outside to be regulated. And having
Mm.
what looks like a big reaction could be actually a regulation and an appropriate readjustment.
Yeah.
Tell me
And
again, what was your big insight?
yeah, my big insight was that when in these moments where we have conflicts and we are activated, if we can first, like you said, breathe through, right? Just breathing is lower, and like when we can hear our own breath, we're already creating oh, that's another thing, like allow ourselves to breathe loud enough that we can hear our own breath actually is creating sound and moving energy in a way that's still acceptable and it's not like I'm yelling at the other person. And for sure, if the other person is nervous or anything, just by hearing your heavy breathing, it might be that they notice that there's something that is a little bit off
Yeah.
without having to scream or yell or anything. But it helps us regulate as well, right?
Yeah.
And finding ways where we can, instead of create more resistance, we can accept and move through. There's one thing that you mentioned there about Guru Jagat, like when someone says something nasty to you, or being able to just say, okay, like you're allowed to have your opinion or whatever it is. I feel like that's a big thing because if something is not true about us, there's nothing that we need to be activated on. And if it's true, then there's nothing that we need to be activated about either. Of course, we might feel bothered, but that's just like the thing that I mentioned. Like you're self sabotaging with this, like, and I'll be, if I'm conscious enough to say like, yeah, actually I am, and I'm not gonna shame myself for this because I get to acknowledge that and not feel like that's something against me. Like that's a point of awareness, right?
Yeah.
So whenever you can find ways to move with the energy, not fight back, but allow that to pass. Like either if it is like you said, like you're allowed to have your, that's okay. You're allowed to have that opinion. Or
Yeah.
if you accept, like I did with that in that case, like yeah, I am self-sabotaging. You're right, and that's the best I can do right now. That's my coping mechanism in this moment.
That's my coping mechanism in this moment. I love that response. You're right. And I'm going to keep doing it because that's my current coping mechanism. I'm having this image of a buffet table. And you're not offended by the coleslaw on a buffet table, right? Like you either want it on your plate or you don't want it, in which case you leave it. But you're not like, I can't believe they served coleslaw, right? You're like, I either want to pick it up or I want to leave it. Oh my
Yeah.
God. Life goals. Hashtag life goals.
Yeah.
Everything is just a buffet, and I'm either going to pick it up or I'm going to leave it. And if I
Yeah.
pick it up, it's because I want it and I want to engage with it. And if I leave it, it's like, no, thank you.
Yeah. And same thing for stuff that we see on the internet. We don't have to comment on every post just because we're offended by it. That,
But it's so much fun. I love reading nasty, snarky comments on really neutral content. On YouTube, I watch a lot of shows about like people house hunting, like they're buying a house or they're renovating a house. It's really not controversial in any way. And the comments people leave are like, I can't believe they chose that wallpaper. These people are, I mean, they're just like so intense. And I think it actually, I'll say this, in small doses, that's part of me readjusting my nervous system. That's me stepping a little bit into conflict
yeah.
and be like, I can hang out in a kind of conflict space and be around this anger and this vitriol in a way that's it's almost like aversion therapy when somebody has a phobia. What do you call it? Exposure therapy, right?
Exposure therapy. Yeah.
Oh, so you're afraid of spiders, are you? Right. And I don't know the ins and outs of that and how it's done so that somebody doesn't just, go deeper into the fear or the phobia. I'm sure there's a lot of care and regulation there. But it's kind of how I can practice being around conflict, and it's not about me. And so there's not a chance of feeling like I'm going to internalize it. I'm just, okay, I'm building up a little bit of strength to be around negative emotion.
And actually, I love that you brought the exposure therapy to it, because that's basically what the guy in the river did with you as well. Like that
Mhm.
jumping before you actually fall out of the boat, like that was exposure therapy to what you
Yeah.
would face uh, a little bit after.
Yeah.
So
Face the
yeah,
fear head on. Yeah.
yeah,
Brilliant. Face the fear, and what made it work was it was safe to do. This was somebody trusted, and we did it in a calm part of the river.
yeah,
So it's exposure plus
yeah.
exposure plus safety and
Practice
trust.
in a safe environment so that
Yes.
you can do it in a less safe environment with it. Yeah.
Yeah. And that puts me in mind of things that you do in Hot Light Sisterhood and some of the moon circles that you host, where you invite people to sing, to make sound, to spontaneously create,
Yeah.
the song lyrics, giving us a framework for it. That's a peak experience as well. And getting to practice that in an incredibly safe place, an incredibly supportive place, that can shift. I mean, you've got at least a couple of us. I don't know how many people that came to you and were like, I'm not, I don't sing, I can't sing, I don't ever want to sing, who've now recorded songs
Yeah.
that are out, on Spotify. And what a beautiful testament to the power of building resilience and experiencing peak moments in this safe container. So I mean, that's my big insight. I wasn't making that connection, but one of the ways I can practice and peak experience and build resiliency is actually through taking creative risks.
Yeah. True. Well, practicing. Well, first, thank you for pointing that.
Yeah.
I was thinking of that as well, because we're living in a society that where being right is more valued than being creative, and it takes and a lot of the criticism when people are being themselves and are being creative takes away from the ability for people to create and to express, because everyone is feeling like, am I doing right, am I doing wrong, I can't mess up, I need to do it right. And that fear of doing anything wrong is what takes away from our ability to be ourselves, to create, to express, to like be authentic and like I'm missing the word here, but it's like um, spontaneous.
Yeah.
That's the word. And
Yeah.
I feel like this goes completely against the regulation, the control, because that's where we need to let go a little bit. And it can also bring back to the exercise and sports and stuff like we are talking about, and even the pain that you mentioned. There are things that we're going to do, like in sports, in workout and stuff, that if we are doing rigid, trying to control what we're going to end up hurting ourselves. Like if you pick a surfboard and you try to fight the waves, you're going to end up hurting yourself. The wave is stronger than us.
Yeah.
We need to be able to the same thing, like move below the wave and to go with the flow. And this is the ultimate practice for everything in life, I feel, like sports, creativity, for conflict and so on. Learning how to go with the flow and flow with the energy, with whatever it is in front of us, instead of trying to create more resistance. And I think that's the ultimate um, knowledge, or I should say, like, yeah, probably knowledge is a good word. Wisdom, that's the word that we can create for ourselves.
Sounds like an amazing place to be. I feel like I want to choose as my insight homework viewing creative expression as my nervous system workout.
Yeah.
And what I think that looks like is when I'm in that space of, oh, I don't know what to say, or oh God, whatever, the doubts and the fears that are coming up around sharing something that comes from my creative heart, to say, oh, excellent, good, because that means this counts as my nervous system exercise for the day.
Yeah. I feel like mine is like, well, there's a lot of self-knowledge in here as well. We're talking about wisdom, but uh, just having in my mind in anything, any situation that I go through, how can I accept more and let go of resistance in any situation?
Mm.
That's my main goal. Like, how can I move with the flow instead of exerting resistance in any situation, anything.
Amazing. I bet
I
it
want to
starts with breath,
navigate.
like you were saying.
What?
I bet it starts with breath, like you were saying.
For sure, for sure. Don't hold your breath in this situation.
I love it. Well, we'd love to hear from anybody listening, watching. What's your big insight? What's your big takeaway? And what are you gonna take on as your insight to action, your assignment, your practicum in the world?
Yeah, we love to hear.
And after all this, what do you think? Do we stop regulating the nervous system?
What would be the best way to do this? Yeah. All right. No assumptions here. So whatever you think it's right or wrong, you're right.
Yeah. Leave us a comment and disagree with us so we can practice going, okay, that's your opinion.
So we can deal with conflict. Yeah. Yeah. Take care, everyone. Until next
Thanks for
time.
joining us. See you next time.